When I confidently asked about my promotion raise and got reality check instead, my name is Maddox Thompson. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a senior marketing analyst at a mid-sized tech company called Innovate Tech Solutions in Denver, Colorado. For the past 4 years, I had been what I believed was the backbone of our marketing department, consistently putting in long hours and taking on responsibilities that seemed way beyond my official job description. I genuinely believed I was not just valuable, but absolutely indispensable to the company's success. My journey at Innovate Tech started right after I graduated with my MBA. I was hungry, ambitious, and ready to climb the corporate ladder fast. The company was smaller then, around 200 employees, and I thought I could make a big impact quickly. My manager at the time, Robert Chen, seemed impressed with my enthusiasm and work ethic. I threw myself into every project, stayed late without being asked, and volunteered for additional assignments whenever possible. In my first year, I helped launch 3 major marketing campaigns, managed our social media presence across 4 platforms, and even assisted with some basic graphic design when our creative team was overwhelmed. Robert praised my versatility and dedication in my year-end review, giving me a solid performance rating and a modest 4% raise. I was thrilled and convinced that bigger things were just around the corner. By my second year, the company had grown to over 300 employees, and we hired a new department head, Jennifer Walsh. Jennifer came from a Fortune 500 background and immediately began restructuring our processes and expectations. Initially, I was excited about this change. Surely someone with her experience would recognize my potential and fast-track my career advancement. Jennifer seemed pleasant enough during our first few interactions. She observed my work for several months before conducting one-on-one meetings with each team member. When my turn came, I prepared extensively, documenting all my contributions and achievements over the past 2 years. I had a folder full of successful campaign metrics, positive client feedback, and examples of how I had gone above and beyond my basic job requirements. "Maddox," Jennifer said during that first formal review, "you're clearly a dedicated employee. I can see you care about your work and the company's success." I beamed, waiting for the but that never came. Instead, she simply said, "Keep up the good work, and let's see how things develop." I left that meeting feeling optimistic, but slightly confused. I had expected more specific praise, maybe a discussion about advancement opportunities, or at least acknowledgement of my standout contributions. But I told myself that Jennifer was still learning about the team and that recognition would come with time. The third year brought new challenges and what I perceived as new opportunities to shine. We landed our biggest client ever, Morrison Industries, a manufacturing company looking to completely overhaul their digital marketing strategy. The account was worth over $800,000 annually, and Jennifer assigned it to our team as a collaborative effort. My colleague Sarah Mitchell, who had joined the company about 6 months after me, was tasked with developing the overall strategy. Sarah had an analytical mind and a knack for understanding complex client needs, but I always felt her approach was too theoretical. She spent weeks researching Morrison's industry, analyzing their competitors, and developing what seemed like an overly complicated strategic framework. Meanwhile, I was assigned to execution implementing the social media components, coordinating with our design team, and managing the day-to-day client communications. This is where I felt I truly excelled. While Sarah was buried in spreadsheets and strategy documents, I was the one actually making things happen. I was the face of our company to the Morrison team, the one they called when they had questions or concerns. The campaign launched in January and was an immediate success. Morrison's social media engagement increased by 340% in the first month. Their website traffic doubled, and most importantly, they saw a 28% increase in qualified leads within the first quarter. The client was thrilled, and we received a glowing testimonial that became a centerpiece of our company's marketing materials. I felt vindicated and more confident than ever about my value to the company. While Sarah had created the strategy, I had brought it to life. I was the one who made it work in the real world, who adapted to challenges as they arose, who built the relationship that kept the client happy and engaged. Around the same time, I noticed that David Kumar, who had joined our team about a year after me, was getting more interesting assignments. David was quiet and methodical, the kind of person who spoke thoughtfully in meetings rather than jumping in with immediate responses like I did. Jennifer seemed to seek out his opinions on various projects, and I often saw them having lengthy discussions in her office. Initially, I wasn't too concerned. David was competent, but I felt my contributions were more visible and impactful. I was the one clients remembered, the one who delivered results, the one who could be counted on to get things done quickly and efficiently. But as months passed, I began to notice other changes. Sarah was being included in more strategic discussions with senior leadership. David was asked to present our quarterly results to the executive team. Even Jessica Torres, who had joined our team less than a year ago, seemed to be getting more responsibility and recognition than I was. Jessica particularly frustrated me. She was smart, I'll give her that, but she was still learning the ropes. Yet Jennifer seemed to favor her, giving her high-profile projects and including her in important client meetings. I couldn't understand what she was doing differently that warranted such attention. During team meetings, I made sure to speak up frequently, sharing my insights and offering suggestions for improvement. I wanted to demonstrate my engagement and strategic thinking. But I noticed that Jennifer's eyes often seemed to glaze over when I spoke, and she rarely followed up on my suggestions with specific action items. Meanwhile, when Sarah or David spoke, Jennifer leaned in, asked follow-up questions, and often implemented their recommendations. It was frustrating and confusing. I felt like I was being overlooked despite my obvious contributions to the team's success. The breaking point came during our annual company retreat in September. These retreats were typically a mix of team-building activities, strategic planning sessions, and social events. I always looked forward to them as opportunities to network with senior leadership and showcase my personality beyond just work performance. During the strategic planning session, Jennifer asked each department to present their key achievements and goals for the coming year. Our marketing team had had an exceptional year, largely due to the Morrison campaign and several other successful projects I had been heavily involved in. When it came time for our presentation, Jennifer asked Sarah to present our strategic overview, David to discuss our analytics and performance metrics, and Jessica to outline our content strategy evolution. I was assigned to operate the slide presentation. I felt humiliated. While my colleagues were positioned as strategic thinkers and leaders, I was relegated to clicking through slides. During the presentation, I watched as Sarah received praise for the Morrison strategy, David was commended for his analytical insights, and Jessica was recognized for streamlining our content processes. The Morrison campaign, which I considered my greatest achievement, was presented as Sarah's strategic success. My role was mentioned only briefly as excellent execution support. The phrase stung more than I expected. Support? I wasn't support, I was the driving force behind making that campaign actually work. After the presentation, several senior executives approached Sarah, David, and Jessica to discuss their insights further. I stood nearby, waiting to be included in the conversation, but the discussion continued around me as if I were invisible. That evening, during the social portion of the retreat, I found myself venting to anyone who would listen. I complained about how undervalued I felt, how my contributions were being overlooked, and how unfair it was that newer employees were getting more recognition than I was. It's politics, I told Mike from the sales team. Jennifer plays favorites, and unfortunately, I'm not one of them. But you can't argue with results, and I deliver results. Several colleagues nodded sympathetically, but I noticed a few exchanging glances that I couldn't quite interpret. At the time, I assumed they were agreeing with my assessment of the situation. The months following the retreat were increasingly difficult. I found myself becoming more critical of my colleagues' work, more vocal about what I perceived as their mistakes, and more frustrated with Jennifer's leadership decisions. I began documenting instances where I felt I was being overlooked or undervalued, building a case in my mind for why I deserved better treatment. When November arrived, Jennifer announced that the company had had its best year ever, with revenue growth of 34% and client retention rates at an all-time high. She called an all-hands meeting to discuss the company's success and announce some organizational changes designed to reward top performers and position us for continued growth. "Thanks to everyone's exceptional work this year," she said, standing at the front of our main conference room. "We're in a position to make some significant investments in our team. We'll be creating several new leadership positions and implementing a comprehensive promotion and salary adjustment program." My heart began racing. This was it. This was the moment I had been working toward for 4 years. All those long hours, all those successful campaigns, all that dedication was finally going to pay off. I felt a surge of excitement and vindication. Finally, Jennifer would have to acknowledge my contributions and reward me appropriately. The meeting ended with Jennifer promising individual discussions with team members over the following weeks. I left the conference room practically floating, already mentally spending my raise and planning how I would handle my new leadership responsibilities. I didn't have to wait long. The next week, I watched as Sarah was called into Jennifer's office, emerging an hour later with a huge smile and barely contained excitement. When I casually asked her how the meeting went, she beamed and said, "I can't say anything official yet, but it was really good news." 2 days later, it was David's turn. He came out of Jennifer's office looking pleased and slightly stunned, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Again, he was diplomatically vague about the details, but his demeanor suggested very positive news. Then Jessica had her meeting. She practically bounced out of Jennifer's office, and I could see her texting excitedly on her phone as she walked back to her desk. Days passed, and I still hadn't been called in. I began to feel anxious, wondering if Jennifer was saving the best news for last, or if there had been some scheduling oversight. Finally, unable to wait any longer, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I sent Jennifer an email requesting a meeting to discuss my performance and the exciting organizational changes. She responded quickly, scheduling time for the following Friday afternoon. The wait was agonizing, but I used the time to prepare thoroughly. I created a detailed summary of my achievements over the past year, including specific metrics from the Morrison campaign, client testimonials, and examples of how I had gone above and beyond my basic job responsibilities. By the time Friday arrived, I was confident and excited. I had convinced myself that Jennifer was probably planning something special for me, perhaps a more significant promotion than my colleagues had received. After all, I had been with the company longer than most of them and had consistently delivered results. I walked into Jennifer's office that afternoon feeling like I was walking into my future. The office was neat and professional, with Jennifer's various industry awards displayed on the wall behind her desk. She looked up from her computer as I entered, gesturing for me to take a seat in one of the chairs across from her desk. "Maddox," she said, "thank you for requesting this meeting. I know you're curious about the organizational changes and how they might affect you." "Absolutely," I replied, settling into my chair with what I hoped was an appropriately professional but enthusiastic demeanor. "I've been thinking a lot about my contributions to the team this year and how I can take on even more responsibility going forward." Jennifer nodded slowly, and I noticed her expression was more neutral than I had expected. "Before we dive into that, I'd like to get your perspective on how you think this year has gone for you professionally." This was an opportunity to present my case. I launched into my prepared summary, highlighting the Morrison campaign's success, my client management skills, my willingness to take on extra responsibilities, and my consistent availability for urgent projects. I spoke for several minutes, growing more confident as I laid out what I considered to be an undeniable case for promotion and recognition. When I finished, Jennifer was quiet for a moment, looking down at some notes on her desk. Finally, she looked up at me, and the expression on her face made my stomach drop slightly. "Maddox," she said slowly, "I appreciate your enthusiasm and your dedication to your work, but I think we need to have a very honest conversation about your performance and your role on this team." The word "but" hit me like a cold wave. This wasn't the conversation I had expected or prepared for. "I'm excited for my promotion and the raise that comes with it," I said, trying to maintain my confident tone. "I know how valuable I've been to this team, and I'm ready to take on whatever new challenges you have in mind." Jennifer's response was not what I expected. She actually chuckled, not maliciously, but in a way that suggested she found something amusing about my statement. "What raise?" she said, tilting her head slightly. "Maddox, you're not getting promoted." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face, and for a moment I couldn't process what she had said. "I'm sorry, what? I don't understand. I've been carrying significant responsibilities for this department for 4 years, the Morrison account alone." Jennifer held up a hand to stop me. "Maddox, let me be very clear with you. Yes, you work hard. You put in long hours, you're reliable, and you complete your assigned tasks competently. But working hard and being ready for advancement are two very different things." I sat there completely stunned. "I don't understand what you mean. My results speak for themselves." Jennifer leaned back in her chair, and I could see her choosing her words carefully. "Let me ask you something, Maddox. In your 4 years here, how many strategic initiatives have you proposed? How many process improvements have you identified and implemented? How many times have you come to me with an original idea that moved our department forward?" I opened my mouth to respond, but realized I couldn't think of specific examples. I've been focused on execution, on delivering results." "Exactly," Jennifer said. "You execute well. You follow directions, you implement other people's strategies, and you manage day-to-day operations competently. But leadership requires more than that." She opened a folder on her desk and pulled out what appeared to be performance documentation. "Sarah didn't just manage the Morrison campaign. She designed the entire strategic framework after conducting extensive market research and competitive analysis. That strategy is now being adapted for 3 other major clients." My throat felt tight, but I was the one who made it work. I was the client contact. I managed the implementation. "You followed Sarah's detailed implementation plan," Jennifer continued. "Sarah spent 2 weeks creating a comprehensive execution guide that included specific timelines, messaging frameworks, and contingency plans. You did execute it well. Dozens of people could have done the same thing with the same results." Each word fell like a dagger. I tried to interrupt, but Jennifer continued. "David identified a fundamental flaw in how we were measuring campaign effectiveness. His new analytics framework has improved our ROI reporting accuracy by over 40% and has been adopted company-wide. Jessica streamlined our content creation process, reducing production time by 30% while improving quality metrics." I felt like the room was spinning. "So all those extra hours I put in, all the work I took on, was your job?" Jennifer said simply. "Maddox, staying late to finish your assigned work isn't going above and beyond, it's meeting your basic responsibilities. Taking on urgent tasks when needed isn't exceptional, it's what we expect from every team member." The reality of the situation was starting to sink in, and it was devastating. "But my client relationships, my track record." "Your client relationships are good," Jennifer acknowledged. "But they're largely built on you being a reliable point of contact, not on you providing strategic value or innovative solutions. Clients like working with you because you're responsive and pleasant, but they don't see you as a strategic partner. I tried one more approach. Okay, so what do I need to do to get promoted? Give me a roadmap, specific goals, and I'll make it happen. Jennifer's expression softened slightly, but what she said next was even more crushing. Maddox, I need to be completely honest with you. Over the past 4 years, your performance reviews have been consistently average. You meet deadlines, you don't make significant mistakes, but you don't excel. You don't innovate, you don't lead, and you don't inspire others. That's not true, I protested weakly. What about all my contributions? Maddox, you've never once impressed me or anyone else in leadership. You're a solid, reliable employee, but in 4 years, you haven't demonstrated any of the qualities we look for in leaders. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the air conditioning humming, the distant sound of keyboards clicking, the normal sounds of office life continuing while my world was collapsing. Furthermore, Jennifer continued, and I could tell she was reluctant to say what came next. There have been concerns about your attitude lately. Multiple colleagues have mentioned that you seem to feel entitled to recognition and advancement. There have been complaints about you criticizing other team members' promotions and expressing resentment about assignments. I felt my face burning with shame. I thought about all the times I'd complained in the break room, all the comments I had made about Sarah's theoretical approach or David's quiet style. I had thought I was just venting frustration, but apparently, my attitude had been noticed and reported. The retreat presentation incident was particularly telling, Jennifer added. Several people mentioned that you seemed angry about your role in the presentation and spent the evening complaining about the team's leadership decisions. I wanted to disappear. Every conversation I had thought was private commiseration was apparently being viewed as unprofessional griping. So where does this leave me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jennifer folded her hands on her desk. That's entirely up to you, Maddox. You can either take this feedback seriously, make some fundamental changes in how you approach your work and your attitude, and work toward becoming the employee you think you already are. Or you can continue believing that you're undervalued and unappreciated, and look for opportunities elsewhere. The meeting ended with Jennifer suggesting I take some time to process our conversation and decide how I wanted to move forward. I walked back to my desk feeling like I was in a fog. The familiar office environment suddenly felt foreign and unwelcoming. I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen without really seeing it. My colleagues continued their work around me, and I wondered if they all knew about my meeting, if they had been expecting this outcome, if they had been discussing my delusions behind my back. That weekend was one of the most difficult of my life. I barely left my apartment, spending most of the time oscillating between anger, humiliation, and confused self-reflection. I kept replaying the conversation with Jennifer, trying to find fault in her assessment, trying to justify my perspective. But slowly, painfully, I began to see the truth in what she had said. I started thinking back over my 4 years at the company, trying to view my performance through an objective lens rather than through the filter of my own ego and expectations. The Morrison campaign that I was so proud of, when I really examined my role, I realized that Sarah had indeed created a comprehensive strategy document that included detailed implementation instructions, timeline, messaging guidelines, and even scripts for client communications. I had followed her plan meticulously, but I hadn't contributed any original strategic thinking. My client relationship management, which I had considered one of my strongest skills, was really just about being responsive and following up on requests. I had never proactively identified client needs or proposed additional services that could benefit them. All those extra hours I had worked, when I honestly assessed them, most were due to poor time management or procrastination, rather than taking on additional responsibilities. I would often spend time on social media or personal tasks during the day, then stay late to complete work that should have been finished during regular hours. Even my self-perceived role as a team player was questionable. Yes, I helped colleagues when they asked, but I rarely initiated collaboration or offered assistance proactively, and apparently my recent attitude had been anything but team-oriented. The most painful realization was about my contributions to team meetings and strategic discussions. I had thought I was demonstrating engagement and leadership by speaking up frequently, but when I reflected on the content of my contributions, I realized they were often obvious observations, restating points others had already made, or suggestions that showed I hadn't fully understood the issue being discussed. Meanwhile, when Sarah or David spoke in meetings, they typically offered insights that hadn't been considered, asked questions that reframed problems, or proposed solutions that addressed root causes rather than symptoms. Monday morning arrived, and I faced a choice. I could either sulk, become bitter, and eventually leave the company feeling wronged, or I could use this devastating feedback as a catalyst for real change. I chose the latter, though it was one of the hardest decisions I'd ever made. It required admitting that I had been living in a fantasy for 4 years, that my self-perception was completely disconnected from reality, and that I had wasted years of potential growth by refusing to see my shortcomings. I started by doing something I had never done before. I really observed how my successful colleagues approached their work. Instead of dismissing their methods or feeling threatened by their success, I studied them. Sarah's approach to projects was methodical and research-driven. Before proposing any strategy, she would spend considerable time understanding the client's industry, analyzing competitors, and identifying market trends. She would create detailed documentation not just for her own reference, but to ensure that anyone implementing her strategies would understand the reasoning behind each decision. David's analytical skills were impressive, but what I hadn't appreciated was how he translated complex data into actionable insights. He didn't just report numbers, he identified patterns, explained what they meant for our business, and proposed specific changes based on his analysis. Jessica's rapid rise made more sense when I observed her approach to problem solving. She didn't just identify issues, she researched potential solutions, tested different approaches, and documented her findings so others could benefit from her learning. I began to understand that what I had perceived as politics or favoritism was actually Jennifer recognizing and rewarding genuine value creation. My colleagues weren't getting promoted because they were liked more, they were getting promoted because they were contributing at a higher level. Armed with this new understanding, I began to completely restructure how I approached my work. Instead of just completing assigned tasks, I started looking for problems to solve and improvements to make. I spent my evenings and weekends studying industry trends, reading marketing strategy books, and taking online courses in areas where I felt deficient. I began documenting every process I was involved in, looking for inefficiencies and improvement opportunities. The first major change I made was in how I approached the Morrison account. Instead of just managing day-to-day communications and executing predetermined strategies, I began analyzing their performance data to identify additional opportunities. I discovered that while our social media campaigns were performing well, their email marketing was significantly underperforming industry benchmarks. I spent 2 weeks researching email marketing best practices, analyzing their current sequences, and developing recommendations for improvement. Instead of just implementing changes myself, I prepared a comprehensive presentation for Jennifer and Sarah, outlining my analysis, proposed solutions, and projected impact. This was the first time I had ever proactively brought strategic recommendations to leadership. Jennifer seemed genuinely surprised when I requested a meeting to present my findings. "Maddox," she said, "this is really impressive work. Your analysis is thorough, and your recommendations are well-researched and practical. The email marketing improvements I proposed were implemented and resulted in a 23% increase in open rates and a 31% increase in click-through rates within the first month. More importantly, I had demonstrated that I could think strategically and contribute beyond just execution." But I didn't stop there. I began approaching every aspect of my work with the same analytical, proactive mindset. I identified inefficiencies in our social media scheduling process and developed a streamlined workflow that saved the team approximately 3 hours per week. I researched and proposed new tools for project management that improved our team's productivity and client communication. Most significantly, I worked on changing my attitude and approach to collaboration. Instead of viewing my colleagues as competition or threats, I began seeing them as resources and partners. I started asking Sarah for advice on strategic thinking, David for guidance on data analysis, and Jessica for insights on process improvement. Initially, they seemed surprised by my new approach. I had to rebuild relationships that had been damaged by my previous attitude and comments. But gradually, they began to see my efforts as genuine and started including me in discussions and projects in ways they never had before. I also made a conscious effort to change how I contributed to team meetings. Instead of speaking frequently just to be heard, I listened more carefully and spoke only when I had something meaningful to add. I asked questions that helped clarify issues rather than making obvious observations. I began preparing for meetings by researching topics in advance so I could contribute informed perspectives. The changes didn't go unnoticed. Sarah started consulting me on strategic decisions, asking for my input on client needs and implementation challenges. David began including me in his analytics reviews, explaining his methods and asking for my observations about trends and patterns. Most importantly, Jennifer began treating me differently. She started asking for my opinion on various issues, including me in strategic planning discussions, and giving me assignments that required more independent thinking and decision-making. The transformation wasn't easy or quick. There were times when I fell back into old patterns, times when I felt frustrated with the pace of change, and times when I questioned whether the effort was worth it. But I kept reminding myself of how devastating it had been to realize that I had wasted 4 years living in a delusion. 6 months after that crushing conversation with Jennifer, she called me into her office again. This time, I felt nervous but hopeful, rather than entitled and expectant. "Maddox," she said, "I want to talk to you about your performance over the past several months." My heart started racing, but I tried to remain calm and professional. "The transformation has been remarkable," she continued. "You've contributed several major process improvements that have measurably impacted our team's efficiency and effectiveness. Your strategic thinking has evolved dramatically. Most importantly, you've become someone the team looks to for leadership and guidance." She paused, and I held my breath. "We're creating a new position, Marketing Strategy Coordinator. The role involves developing implementation strategies for our major accounts, leading process improvement initiatives, and mentoring junior team members. It comes with a 22% salary increase and your first direct report. I'd like to offer it to you." I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but these were completely different tears than the ones I had fought back 6 months earlier. These were tears of genuine accomplishment, of knowing that I had earned this opportunity through real growth and contribution. "Thank you," I managed to say. "I'm honored and I accept." But the real victory wasn't the promotion or the raise. It was the knowledge that I had fundamentally changed how I approached my work and my career. I had learned to see myself clearly, to value substance over perception, and to contribute meaningfully rather than just appearing busy. The promotion came with its own challenges. Managing a direct report forced me to articulate my thinking clearly and to model the behaviors I wanted to see. Leading process improvement initiatives required me to build consensus, manage resistance to change, and measure the impact of new approaches. But I approached these challenges with the same methodical, research-driven approach I had learned from observing my colleagues. I read management books, sought mentorship from senior leaders, and continuously sought feedback on my performance. A year later, our team had grown to 12 people, and I was promoted again to senior marketing manager, overseeing 3 direct reports and managing our largest client relationships. But more importantly, I had become someone who truly deserved the recognition I was receiving. Looking back, that humiliating conversation with Jennifer was the best thing that ever happened to my career. It shattered the comfortable delusion I had been living in and forced me to confront the gap between my perception and reality. I learned that working hard isn't enough if you're working hard on the wrong things. That being busy isn't the same as being productive. That feeling entitled to recognition is a sure way to ensure you never actually deserve it. Most importantly, I learned that real success comes from making others around you more successful, from solving problems rather than just completing tasks, and from continuous learning and growth rather than coasting on past achievements. Today, I lead a team of 8 people, and I make sure to have honest, direct conversations with them about their performance and growth opportunities. I never want anyone to experience the shock and humiliation I felt that day. But if they do, I hope they use it as a catalyst for growth, rather than a reason for bitterness. I've also made it a point to recognize and develop employees who might be in similar situations to where I was hardworking, dedicated people who might be missing the strategic thinking and leadership skills needed for advancement. I try to provide the guidance and feedback that could have helped me avoid years of stagnation. The experience taught me that sometimes the most valuable feedback comes wrapped in the most painful delivery. The question is, will you listen to it and use it to grow, or will you dismiss it to protect your ego and continue living in delusion? I chose to listen, to change, and to grow. It was the hardest thing I've ever done professionally, but it was also the most important. Because on the other side of that pain and humiliation was not just a better career, but a better version of myself. What do you think about Maddox's journey? Have you ever had a moment where your perception of your performance didn't match reality? How did you handle feedback that challenged your self-image? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow for more stories about professional growth, career development, and the sometimes painful but necessary process of self-discovery.